Hey, it's Golden Buddha here, back with some more RPG horror stories for your listening entertainment. Today, we have a story about a cleric who makes some very non-cleric decisions, and just a player that's kind of being an asshole. So, let's get right into it. Roll post. This one happened to me quite a while ago, but it's been weighing on my mind recently. I was the GM for this one. The party consisted of a barbarian, two unimportant to this story individuals, and a cleric. The latter was relatively new to the party, seemingly okay guy, but a constant source of complaints. He'd regularly talk mad smack about the party's performance, despite the party playing quite tactically and well, in my opinion, and especially focusing on the barbarian's conduct as ineffective for, I guess, not just blindly running in and wailing on the enemy every single fight. I wanted to talk to the player about this and tell him to bring it down, but the other players insisted that his behavior was fine, that it's just him joking around and how he always is in these things, and that they really didn't mind, so I let it slide. It was especially weird since the barbarian was actually the one who invited him for the game, but sure, okay. One of the most prominent complaints was the party always making cowardly retreats when faced with deadly foes. This being an AD&D game that didn't mess around with lethality, retreat was very much a good idea a lot of the time, but that didn't stop the complaints from coming. And there was more than one incident of the party being forced to stay and take a bad fight due to the cleric's unwillingness to retreat. The party's survival of these situations was nothing short of miraculous. This came to a head when exploring a dungeon while somewhat low on resources and HP, the party encountered a gorgon. The dice go poorly for them, and they're turning tail to run, and of course, the cleric is refusing to fall back, insisting that they can take it, and calling the party a bunch of cowards. Then the cleric gets hit with a breath attack, fails a save, and is immediately petrified. The barbarian, moral giant that he is, grabs the petrified jackass and starts running. Despite the extra weight, the party manages to disengage, but they're in trouble and need to get out of the dungeon fast. Of course, this is hard when you're lugging a statue with you, and it's not made easier by the petrified player sniping you and calling you bad. The cleric is not even holding back this time, despite me asking him to turn it down a little, not shutting up about how the fight could have been won easily if the barbarian, you guessed it, just went in and wailed on the monster. After stoically putting up with this for a good 5 minutes, the barbarian says, "Man, fuck this," ditches the petrified cleric into a nearby pit trap and says that it'll be safe there until they come back for it later. The cleric is visibly upset about this, but before he goes off, he notices my getting tired of your shit stare and just goes quiet. About 30 minutes later, after a brief break and refreshing their stuff, the party goes back and retrieves the cleric and starts heading back to town. As it happens, a temple of the cleric's deity, the goddess of seasons and peace, is nearby. The cleric had been working hard to impress these people, and most of his non-dungeon crawling actions were in some way serving that. So the party drags the petrified cleric into the altar, get him up on the altar, and the head priest whips out Stone to Flesh. The cleric, upon recovering, says that he immediately jumps up, grabs his weapon, and attempts to murder the barbarian with it. The barbarian, who had risked his own life to save the cleric, in front of the clergy that he was so eager to impress, with one foot still on the altar of the goddess of peace. My reaction at this point was exchanging glances with the other players, who were just as speechless as me. At that point, exhausted, I just decided that the goddess turned him into a fern. After a couple minutes of him calling this whole thing a sham and some sort of setup to make him look like an idiot and not let him play, I politely ask him to leave. He packs up in a huff, goes out the door, and I have fortunately not seen him since. Until last Saturday, when I bumped into him and his wife at the flea market. We talked for a few minutes. He mentions he basically lost touch with everyone in that game since. He talked with great fondness about our game, not mentioning how his participation had ended, how he's sick of playing 5e, and how he wants to play some old school stuff again. He asked me if I was still running AD&D. I am, in fact, still running old school D&D, but I leave it to the readers to conclude how I answered that question. Too long, didn't read. Player constantly and aggressively complains about party, gets himself petrified through his own poor decision making, attempts to murder PC that saved his life, and gets unceremoniously booted. End post. I can understand how sometimes it can be frustrating when someone plays their character a certain way. I get that. Someone tries to like, oh, well, I'm going to sneak. And then they're like, well, you don't have any points to sneak. Well, I want to try it anyways. You have to let people play their characters. You got to. It doesn't matter if they're playing suboptimally. Like, it's about telling a story. So if that's the story they're trying to tell, and if that's the way they want to play their character, you kind of leave it alone, unless they're literally just being a jackass. But that doesn't seem to be the case for the Barbarian in this story. It just seems like he was playing a bit more, like a bit smart, and especially for AD&D where you can die at the drop of a hat. Yeah, I don't see why that's a problem. I totally think that this cleric dude, it's good that you don't play with him anymore, and he doesn't have a group for a reason. People lost touch with him for a reason. So there you go. And that's about all I got to say for it. But what do you guys think of this story? Let me know in the comments below. Like and subscribe for more content. And thanks for listening, guys. And as always, this is Golden Buddha telling you to stay enlightened and stay safe.